The United States is the world's largest importer of raw aluminum, but the country lacks the capacity to produce enough aluminum to meet its own needs.
A couple decades ago, we had 30 aluminum smelters around the nation. Today we have 4. And that
Wow, that's quite a drastic difference.
drop is almost inconceivable, and it's dangerous.
The Trump administration believes this problem could be solved with tariffs.
And I have also imposed a 25% tariff on foreign aluminum, copper, lumber, and steel.
A tariff is a tax, quite simply. It's a tax that's paid by an importer, so when a product crosses the border, it's paid at the port of entry by the person who's paying to bring that good into the country.
Any analysis of the consumer impact depends on what the president commits to as negotiations unfold.
This one's interesting because he's building on something that he started in his first term. They want those materials to be manufactured inside the U.S.
Bringing some of this activity back to the states could be costly.
If you think AI is power intensive, aluminum's a whole different world. It is 6 times more power intensive than AI data centers.
I think it's going to be much harder for these firms to absorb the price increases.
So, will aluminum production move back to the U.S.? And how will that affect the prices that Americans pay? Americans use a lot of aluminum. The U.S. threw away 61 billion cans in 2024, enough to average 15 12-packs per person. In the same year, 46 billion cans were recycled.
80% of the aluminum we use in the United States every year is recycled aluminum. So we're the world's leader in recycling aluminum, and we want to remain so.
But the metal has many applications beyond the kitchen.
Aluminum is all around us and we don't even know it.
For example, as much as 80% of an aircraft's content is made of aluminum. The metal is also a very effective conduit for electricity, making it a top choice for long-distance transmission lines.
It really is the magic metal. It put men on the moon, it put satellites in space. So for our energy infrastructure, for our transportation infrastructure, for almost every national defense application, you have to use aluminum. So it really is a critical mineral.
There are small deposits of aluminum in the United States, in a form called bauxite, but it's much more productive to mine and produce the metal in other parts of the world. The world's leading aluminum producers include China, India, Russia, and Canada. Since 2018, the U.S. has charged a 10% tariff on imports of aluminum into the country.
The tariffs were initially pretty broad, and we granted exemptions to Canada and Mexico, which are, in general, are large trading partners for us. During the Biden administration, we negotiated quotas with the EU and the UK.
According to S&P Global, the effective tariff rate for aluminum was just 3.91%.
Wow, that's much lower than 25% as Trump is proposing at this point. And again, as they mentioned, tariffs are paid by the importers at the particular country. And usually those prices are passed on to the consumers. And what this does is this artificially inflates the price of goods in a particular segment. And so the idea is long-term, if you rise the price of aluminum from imported countries, then it gets much more competitive within the US to compete with them. So basically, in the US, maybe a particular area might not be as lucrative. And so they say, why would I work in aluminum when we can import it for half of the price, for instance, as an example? And so they'll say, it's not profitable for me, I'm not going to necessarily go into that business. But then tariffs sort of even the playing field to some extent, but they do so by raising the prices of the good. And so that's where if they increase the import tariffs by 25% for aluminum, then basically all aluminum prices go up by 25%. And that could be the margin necessary for someone in America to say, you know what? I used to get like 5% margin. That wasn't quite enough. I was teetering on the brink of not having a business, but adding a 25% tariff, now that's much more wiggle room for me to get back in there and actually start to expand. And that's the idea behind it, which is if you increase the prices artificially, then somebody within your country could have more opportunities to compete. And so that is at least my understanding of some of Trump's big policy advocacy is around this idea that long term it might push more manufacturing and ownership of producing goods and materials within the US.
In February 2025, the US is now increasing the tariff rate on all imported aluminum, Beginning in March, it will be 25%.
The tariffs are going to apply not to the whole product, but only to the aluminum content of that product, which is also going to add another administrative burden for businesses because now they have to report this, to the government. So not only are we getting, these price impacts, but we're getting more administrative complexity.
Industries that rely on aluminum, like automakers, could be forced to raise prices. The housing lobby also has concerns. Tariffs on building materials could increase the cost of newly constructed homes by as much as $22,000 over the next 12 months. This analysis, conducted by CoreLogic, includes levies on aluminum alongside those on steel, lumber, and much more. Still, lobbyists and economists say that the overall price effects could be muted.
The impact on consumers, quite honestly, is pretty minimal because aluminum is usually one component of a product. The value of aluminum in that product is generally not very high when it comes to the actual selling price. Consider a $40,000 car or something like that. It might increase the price by about $75.
Even then, price hikes from tariffs don't need to be passed on to U.S. consumers. Businesses could instead pivot. For example, Coca-Cola says it will sell more soda in plastic bottles if aluminum tariffs were to hit the U.S. Canada and China are among the biggest importers of aluminum into the United States. In March, the U.S. also threatened to place additional tariffs on all goods coming from China, Mexico, and Canada, which means the many aluminum products consumed in the U.S. could receive multiple stacked tariffs.
So these steel and aluminum tariffs, according to the White House officials I've spoken with, are going to add on to any tariffs that are already in place.
The prospect of a trade war with Canada and Mexico could upset an old and vital partnership. Companies like Alcoa are heavily reliant on imports of aluminum from Canada. The brands that buy aluminum from them, from car manufacturers to food suppliers and consumer staples makers, could see an impact too.
If we're buying less aluminum from Canada, we're impacted because we have to pay for higher price domestic aluminum, or we could just continue paying the higher import price.
The premium for U.S. Midwest aluminum has increased by over 60% between January and March 5th, 2025.
When firms purchase aluminum, they're not just purchasing the raw material, but they're also getting a lot of other products that are recycled. These prices, for the recycled content are also rising, even though they're not subject to the tariffs.
The push to produce more aluminum in the United States could ultimately affect jobs in the domestic industry.
Every one job in Canada in the aluminum industry smelting metal supports 13 jobs in the United States. We built a lot of furnaces and we need something to put in them. And Canada has primary aluminum. And if we don't import it from Canada, our other potential partners around the world are India, the Middle East, some from Australia, and then after that, China or Russia.
The administration says that tariffs will help the U.S. rebuild its industrial base. The U.S. industrial base shrank in recent decades as other countries' manufacturing capacity grew. The biggest example here is not Canada, but China. China's production of aluminum has increased sharply since the early 2000s, after the country was allowed to join the World Trade Organization. Leaders from both parties have criticized China's strategic moves that created this explosive growth.
Metals production, steel and aluminum, was targeted several decades ago by the Chinese Communist Party as being an industry that they wanted to not only compete in, but to dominate globally. And so through a variety of government interventions, including massive subsidies, subsidized energy costs, preferential financing, quite honestly, the theft of intellectual property, the subsidies allowed China to come in.
This guy doesn't seem unhappy about this at all.
At an artificially low price, and that has roiled the aluminum industry globally, and in particular in the United States.
So I think I agree, generally speaking, that there's a chance. Obviously, they showed that chart of how much Chinese production of aluminum has grown in recent years, outpacing basically every other country combined. And so clearly there was some intentionality behind that. I don't know if that's necessarily a problem myself. I feel like every country probably has their own thing that they try to specialize in. Obviously, Americans also try to be really good at certain products. We subsidize things like corn or certain agricultural products, and we don't see an issue with that. I think we're the largest exporter of corn, if I'm not mistaken, as well as I'm sure other goods as well. And so it would be weird to go around saying like this is unfair to the rest of the world because we decided to specialize in a particular product. That's the same thing that China is doing, because one country does something that is readily available to them and maybe they're better set up for it. That's what they should take their advantage in, and that allows them to compete and interact at a global economy. And so that doesn't necessarily sound bad to me. If you use this as like any other company, it wouldn't be weird at all. You would say that company is trying to make the most money possible. They're hyper focusing in on their core business. They're trying to get loans for it. They're trying to get the cheapest deal on energy, and they're trying to succeed at this one product. That makes sense to me. And governments do also need to make money, and obviously they want tax from their businesses that are succeeding and doing a good job. So I could see why they are not happy about it, because they're in this space, and so this is competition for them. But that doesn't sound all that bad to me, broadly speaking.
In recent decades, China has also made tremendous strides in manufacturing processes like smelting. Smelting is a critical step in the production process that makes it possible to build so many aluminum products.
40% of the cost of producing smelting aluminum, it's really the electricity that goes into the process.
The White House believes the U.S. domestic smelting capacity is running below ideal levels.
It'll really take a long-term commitment to energy provision. I'm speaking specifically of electricity, and it will take time to build more smelters. And in the meantime, we will import. A company that's planning a smelter in the United States today, they have to get the energy sector to commit to 25 or 30 years of provision of electricity. Then it will take, we believe, around 8 to 10 years to build the smelter, because you have to site it, you have to permit it, you have to build it, you have to get it up and running. And we haven't done that, I would remind you, in 45 years.
This would be incredibly disruptive to power grid. There's a reason why it was outsourced to begin with.
Meanwhile, new technologies like electric vehicles, solar panels, and smartphones require more aluminum, but our domestic supply is running short relative to demand.
The United States is still one of the best places in the world to produce primary aluminum, but it comes back to those fundamentals of the market where we do have to compete today with data centers and others. The only smelter project in the US that is being contemplated right now will use between 700 and 1,000 megawatts of electricity. We'll need a commitment to a reasonable price rate for that electricity for a generation. And so that's a challenge.
Thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed what you've seen, please hit like or subscribe. I'll see you around.